So with Trey Young being moved to the Washington Wizards, and overall, I still like this trade for the Wizards because they're not giving up too much. I mean, CJ McCollum and Corey Kispert. I mean, those players are decent players and good rotation players, but they were not going to make even the playing tournament in the Eastern Conference. Nevertheless, even a contender in the Eastern Conference. And I know you did take Corey Kispert with the 11 pick a few years back. Overall, he really didn't fit in too well, especially the rebuilding mode type of Wizards that we're seeing right now. They drafted the guys that can play his position basically, probably even better and younger with higher upside. And with CJ McCollum, I still feel like he's a serviceable veteran, averaging almost 20 points a game at 18.8. And I still feel like he can be that fourth to fifth option, maybe coming off the bench or starting on a certain team. And overall, I do feel like, Hawks, needed to do something. And this Trey Young situation was kind of weird because they didn't extend in the offseason and they were basically trying to play out how this season was going to go. And the injuries with Trey Young, him only playing 10 games, kind of led to, the Atlanta Hawks saying, hey, we're not going to get, first round pick or, even two, three first round pick. I mean, we saw Desmond Bain go for 4 first round picks in the offseason, and now Trey Young didn't go for 1 first round pick. So that just shows where this trade value for small guard who doesn't play defense and now can be, injury prone. And with that being said, I want to talk about a team and a player in particular that, right now saw this trade and is punching the wall and saying, dang, we should have did this a long time ago. And that team is going to be the Memphis Grizzlies, and the player is going to be John Morant. Everyone knows that tensions are, escalating more with team and Ja. Obviously, his off the court issues are the main problem, but now even injuries are adding up. And, he's coming back and he's just not playing as well as everyone thought. We see glimpses of John Morant, the old John Morant, and he's only played around 18 games this season, averaging 19 points, but he's shooting a career low, 40% from the field and 20% from three. And everyone knew, his weaknesses was his 3 point, shot making and the ability to, space the floor. Now, Ja has never really shot well from three. I mean, last season he shot around 31%. The season before, 28%. So he's been around this 30%, mark from three. And he's never really played more than 67 games. And that was his rookie year. And everyone was like, well, it's his off the court, issues. Once he kind of, grows up and matures, that's going to go away. But yet we have not really seen him grow up. If anything, he's kind of just, embraced that role. And he doesn't need that role because he is the star player. He could be the superstar player. And now injuries are piling up. I mean, last season he only played 50 games. The season before that, he only played 9 games. So we're seeing a pattern with this small guard who rely on their athletic ability to finish at the rim. And if they're not finishing at the rim, they can't space the floor and they can't defend. Why are you going to pay this guy, $200 million and make him the number one option? And we've seen athletic point guards that don't rely on their shot making, defensive ability. We've seen Derrick Rose. We've seen Russell Westbrook. We've seen better versions of what John Morant can be. And if you look at his field goal percentage since his rookie year, basically his third season, he almost shot 50% from field and now 40%. You get to see signs of aging and him not having the ability to finish around the rim as well anymore. And with the organization, even firing Taylor Jenkins last year, everyone was kind of scratching their head saying, like, why this happened? Because you had a winning record. And with them losing more this season, you can't really fire your head coach and say, you're the problem. Everyone knows that it's just a fit problem. John Morant cannot be a number one option because he can't space the floor. Right now, he's not finishing around the rim or, even remotely having a consistent jumper right now, and he can't play defense. And if you look at number one options around the NBA right now that are contenders, they are doing these things. They're doing at least two out of these three things. If you look at Cade Cunningham, number one seed in the East right now, he can, space the floor, he can finish around the rim, and he can play defense. Anthony Edwards, SGA, Victor Wembanyama, these players are willing to do all these things to win and compete for a championship. And right now, I do not think John Morant is a number one option, and I don't think he'll ever be a number one option just because not his size, it's just his ability to, be that number one option. He could score the ball, and don't get me wrong, I do think he's going to develop a 3 point shot, but we've seen it so many guys who have the ability to be the number one option or number two option, and they just don't have that drive in them. I mean, we've seen it with, DeAndre Ayton. I mean, he has the God-given ability to be a number one option, to be a number two option, but he just doesn't have that drive in him. And I feel the same thing for a John Morant at this point of his career, whether it's going to be, the injury bug. I think his off the court problems are not going to be there as much when he, gains more, experience. And I know that's a lot to say because, he's been in the league for, 5 to 6 years now, but, is he still going to have the same problem, 8, 9 years in the league? And if so, I don't think he'll stay in the league. I mean, we've seen superstars with off the court problems. I mean, the biggest one being Allen Iverson, and he's a Hall of Famer. And I don't think John Morant, as of right now, has that same, luxury as AI. So what teams around the league can use a small guard who's injury prone, bad at defense, can't space the floor? So what teams would be interested in a John Morant? I mean, you have to look at this from the Atlanta Hawks trade. And I say that because Trey Young has the same defensive liabilities as, John Morant, but he's a better player. And that's not a crazy take to say. Trey Young has been to the Eastern Conference Finals. He has been on the court more than John Morant. Trey Young is a better floor spacer. He's a better playmaker, and he makes everyone around him better because of his ability to score the ball. And I really don't see contenders trading for John Morant because you're gonna have to give up, some key pieces around your bench, some serviceable players, and I just don't realistically see that happening for a John Morant. So if we look at some teams on the bottom of the Western Conference, I would start with New Orleans Pelicans. I don't think they'll do this, trade just because they drafted a point guard, Jeremiah Fears, who's looking promising, and I don't think they're ready to give up on him yet, along with, serviceable players like Herb Jones, Trey Murphy. I just don't realistically see that because I think Trey Murphy, if they're going to trade him, to go for a lot more than a John Morant. And I can see the Kings doing a swap between maybe a Zach LaVine and maybe a, Devin Carter, just because I think it's time to give up on that experiment too, because I don't think he should have went that high. And I think the Kings know it too. When you draft older rookies, it's kind of either they're going to peak early and not develop. And if they're not even peaking early right now, I think it's time just to call it quit and not even, try to experiment too much because this team needs to start going in a rebuild. I just don't see, Kings really benefiting from this John Morant trade either because they're a bad 3 point, spacing team anyway. I mean, you're still going to have DeMar DeRozan, Sabonis, Westbrook, Schroeder. You still have, some young pieces. I mean, Keegan Murray, pretty much the only piece. I just don't see this team realistically being any type of contender, but it can make this team interesting. And if you're, the Grizzlies, I mean, kind of just get Zach LaVine and throw in player. Maybe you get a young player, again, Devin Carter, that can maybe do something on a different team. We've seen it a lot, new opportunities, new environments, but overall, I still feel like this trade is not going to be good for either parties because it's not going to help, either case. I guess it makes the Kings more interesting, but at the same time, I don't see this happening. And with the Clippers, I just don't think there's enough key pieces around a trade. At the end of the day, you don't need, a superstar or a star player to trade. But contract wise, I don't see anything besides maybe a Zubac. I don't think there's a ready to give up on Zubac because pretty much they're only serviceable big men. In the Dallas Mavericks, I could see maybe an Anthony Davis type of swap. And again, another throw-in player. I just don't see this happening. One, because Anthony Davis is much more injury prone. And I just don't see the Grizzlies saying, hey, I'm willing to give up on John Morant or, Anthony Davis in the throw-in player. Maybe if there was an additional first-round pick, I would take that. But don't rely on Anthony Davis to save this team. And with the Portland Trailblazers, I don't think they'll even remotely touch a guard that can't shoot because they're kind of dealing with one right now that also injured of Scoot Henderson. Drew Holiday, you're most likely to give up, and I just don't see that. Or maybe Jeremy Grant, who's playing decent this year. I mean, they're sixth in the West. I just don't see this happening. I think they're just going to play out the season and, see how it goes and see who's going to be on the roster next year. The Golden State Warriors situation is interesting. I mean, would you give up Kuminga, Moody, and maybe another role player to match money? Would that work for John Morant? And would you do it if you're the Golden State Warriors? I mean, we've seen Steve Kerr basically saying, hey, our championship window is basically closing, saying, hey, if Steph Curry doesn't have another star or superstar around him and serviceable role players, hey, we're not going to even compete. We can make the playoffs, but we're not really going to compete for a championship. And he knows it, but does John Morant make you a more championship contender? I mean, I believe Steph Curry can play off the ball. I mean, we've seen it with Klay Thompson, we've seen it with Kevin Durant, and we've seen him like, hey, you do you, and I'll figure out my shots from there. And I believe the Warriors could potentially be a sneaky team in the John Morant trade. I just don't know how much they will want to give up for John Morant. And some Eastern Conference teams, I don't see the Pacers making a trade for a point guard that can't shoot. They have their point guard that led them to the NBA Finals, and they were basically, 48 minutes away and one freak injury away from being an NBA champion. The Brooklyn Nets are an interesting team because I could see this happening. I don't think it will be on Mike Porter swap because he's playing, way better than John Morant. And, Cam Thomas is hurt and he's not making enough money to match, contract wise. So that just leaves Claxton done. And I can see, the Brooklyn Nets, giving up on that because he basically is a one-dimensional player. He could get the double-double, he could, rim protect, but he can't really space the floor and bring the ball up as many centers are nowadays. And I just think the Brooklyn Nets have, five rookies that need to play. I mean, you have multiple guards, multiple centers that you drafted in this year's draft class that's shown flashes. Edward Dimmon, Danny Wolf, Ben Sarah. You have all these players that you need to at least give a shot to. You traded for superstars in the past. I mean, we saw the Darren Williams trade and the KG and Paul Pierce. That obviously didn't work out. And then we saw the Kevin Durant, Kyrie, James Harden trade. Those didn't work out. I think it's time to, develop, homegrown talent. And I think they know it too. So that's the only thing that I'm kind of iffy on the trade for John Morant. The Hornets doesn't make sense. LaMelo Ball is your point guard for the future. And if you're going to move on from him, you could get way more than a John Morant. And him and LaMelo Ball just doesn't make sense on the court together. The Milwaukee Bucks, again, same thing with the Clippers. I don't think talent wise and contract wise that they can match whatever team is going to trade for a John Morant. And the last thing we're going to talk about the Chicago Bulls. And I just don't see this team realistically trading for a John Morant. But at the same time, it would be interesting. And I say that because would you give up Kobe White, maybe a Patrick Williams, and maybe a first round pick to get, a John Morant along? The Grizzlies would have to give up another player, but that would be interesting because how would, John Morant and Josh Giddey work? I just don't realistically see that. I don't see, Kobe White on the, Memphis Grizzlies without, the Grizzlies giving up an additional first round pick at least, because I think that's where his value is the best at. But yeah, guys, that's all for today's video. Let me know what you think of John Morant trade values or some trade ideas in the comments below. But thanks for listening and thanks for watching.